A room full of the city's most powerful people. Crystal chandeliers catching the light. Men in $1,000 suits. Women dripping in diamonds. And in the center of it all, a man stands at the microphone, confident, smiling, about to make an introduction that will destroy his marriage and his reputation in less than 5 minutes. He gestures to the woman beside him, his wife of 15 years, and says the words that will haunt him forever: "She's part of the cleaning staff." The room laughs. Not loud. Not cruel. Just that polite, dismissive chuckle that says we understand, we've all got our little embarrassments. But here's what none of them knew. Not the executives. Not the investors. Not the CEO standing 10 feet away. Not even the husband who just humiliated her. Within 3 minutes, every single person in that ballroom would be on their feet, but not applauding, not networking, not laughing anymore. They would be bowing. Bowing to the woman he just called a cleaner. And the man at the microphone? He would be standing there, frozen, as his entire world collapsed around him. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story about a corporate event gone wrong. It's about the danger of underestimating the people closest to you, about how we decide who matters based on what we can see, and about the moment when all our assumptions shatter in the most public, devastating way possible. Before we get into this, I need you to do something. If you're already feeling something, whether it's anger at the husband, curiosity about the wife, or just that tingle of anticipation for what's coming next, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this channel is built on stories that make you feel, that make you think, that stay with you long after the video ends. And drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Are you in New York? US? London? South Africa? Let us know, because this story is traveling across the world, and I want to see how far it goes. Now, let's get into what really happened that night. To understand how everything fell apart so spectacularly, you need to understand where it started. Daniel Crowell wasn't born into wealth. He grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Ohio, the kind of place where ambition was respected but showing off was looked down on. His father worked in manufacturing for 30 years, same company, same position, content with stability. Daniel loved his father, but he also feared becoming him. He feared the predictability, the smallness of a life that never expanded beyond a 2-bedroom house and a paid-off sedan. So Daniel studied. Scholarships got him through state college. Internships got him into the corporate world. And sheer determination got him up the ladder, one exhausting rung at a time. By his late 20s, he was a junior manager at Hartwell Industries, a mid-sized logistics firm with ambitions to go national. He worked 70-hour weeks. He networked relentlessly. He learned to speak the language of success, all the buzzwords, all the confident posturing, all the performance of competence that sometimes matters more than actual competence. And then he met Evelyn. Evelyn Ross, back then. She was at a friend's birthday party, sitting in the corner with a book, somehow completely comfortable being alone in a room full of people. Daniel was drawn to her immediately, not because she was performing anything, but because she wasn't. In a world where everyone was trying to be seen, she seemed content being invisible. They talked for hours that night. She was sharp, observant, funny in a quiet way that made you feel like you'd discovered something rare. She worked as a freelance consultant, she told him, helping companies solve problems. He didn't ask for details. He was too busy talking about his own career, his plans, his vision for the future. Evelyn listened. She was good at listening. They dated for 2 years. During that time, Daniel's career continued its upward trajectory. Evelyn was always supportive, always there, but never demanding. She didn't need fancy restaurants or expensive gifts. She seemed happy with walks in the park, late-night conversations, the simple rhythm of building a life together. They got married in a small ceremony, just close friends and family. Daniel's colleagues barely knew he was engaged until he showed up with a ring. Evelyn wore a simple dress. There were no grand pronouncements, no social media announcements, no performance of their love. It was real, quiet, solid, or so it seemed. The first few years of marriage were good. They moved into a modest apartment, nothing fancy but comfortable. Daniel continued climbing. Evelyn continued her consulting work, though Daniel never really understood what that meant. When people asked what his wife did, he'd say something vague like, "She's a consultant," and then quickly change the subject back to his own work. He didn't do this maliciously at first. He just genuinely didn't think her work was as interesting or important as his. She worked from home most days. She didn't have an office to go to, no staff to manage, no visible markers of success. To Daniel, it looked like she was just doing freelance projects, paying some bills, keeping herself occupied. He had no idea of the scale of what she was actually doing, and truthfully, he never asked. Evelyn didn't volunteer the information either. Not because she was hiding anything, but because Daniel never seemed interested. Whenever she'd start to talk about a project, his eyes would glaze over, or his phone would buzz, or he'd remember something urgent he needed to do. Eventually, she stopped trying to share that part of her life. She kept working, kept solving complex problems for companies that desperately needed her expertise, but she did it in silence, in a marriage that was slowly becoming a place where only one person's achievements mattered. As Daniel rose higher in Hartwell Industries, the distance between them grew. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single moment of betrayal, no affair, no explosive fight. It was subtler than that. It was in the way he started correcting her grammar at dinner parties. The way he'd steer her away from conversations with his colleagues, as if protecting them from her, or protecting her from them, he wasn't sure which. It was in the way he stopped introducing her with pride and started introducing her with apologetic explanations. "This is my wife, Evelyn. She's more of a homebody. Evelyn doesn't really follow business news." Little dismissals that added up over time, building a wall between who she actually was and who he decided she was. Evelyn noticed, of course. How could she not? But she also understood something about her husband that he didn't understand about himself. Daniel's need for external validation was eating him alive. His worth had become entirely tied to how others perceived him, and he was terrified that she, with her simple clothes and her quiet manner and her refusal to perform success, would diminish him in their eyes. So she made a choice. She let him have his performance. She showed up when required, smiled politely, spoke when spoken to, and otherwise stayed out of his spotlight. It hurt, but she told herself it was temporary, that once he felt more secure, once he achieved whatever milestone he was chasing, he'd come back to her, really see her again. But that's not what happened. The more success Daniel achieved, the more embarrassed he became of her. By their 10th anniversary, he was a senior director. By their 12th, he was being considered for vice president. And by their 15th anniversary, the year of the gala, he had almost completely rewritten their story in his mind. In his version, he was the sole architect of their comfortable life. The nice house they'd bought 5 years earlier, he attributed entirely to his income, forgetting that Evelyn had paid more than half the down payment. The financial stability they enjoyed, he saw as the result of his careful planning, not noticing that they'd never once struggled financially even when he was between positions, because Evelyn's income had quietly filled the gaps. He had convinced himself that he was carrying her, that she was lucky to be married to him, that her simple life was evidence of her simple capabilities. And Evelyn, watching this transformation, felt something inside her harden. Not into bitterness exactly, but into a kind of protective shell. She realized she had made a mistake. Not in marrying him, but in thinking that love alone would be enough to make him see her. Some people, she learned, need the whole world to tell them something is valuable before they can recognize its worth themselves. The invitation to the Hartwell Industries annual gala arrived 6 weeks before the event. It was a big deal this year, bigger than usual. The company was announcing a major expansion, new contracts worth hundreds of millions, and a restructuring of the executive leadership. Daniel was shortlisted for the newly created position of Regional Executive Director, a role that would put him in charge of operations across 5 states. He was obsessed with the gala from the moment the invitation arrived. He bought a new tuxedo, custom-fitted, expensive. He rehearsed talking points in the mirror. He strategized about who to talk to, what to say, how to position himself. Evelyn watched all this with a mixture of sadness and resignation. She knew this night mattered to him, possibly more than anything had mattered in years. She also knew, with growing certainty, that he was going to humiliate her. She could feel it coming. The way he'd been talking about the event, about the important people who would be there, about how crucial it was that everything went perfectly. He hadn't said anything directly, but she knew him well enough to read between the lines. She was a liability in his mind, something to be managed. The morning of the gala, Daniel was already tense. He snapped at her over breakfast about something trivial, then apologized immediately, saying he was just stressed about the evening. Evelyn nodded, understanding. She spent the afternoon preparing herself, not just physically but emotionally. She chose a simple navy dress, elegant but understated. Pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's. Her hair in a simple twist. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who had learned to take up as little space as possible, who had trained herself to be invisible, and she felt a deep ache for the girl she used to be, the one who never apologized for her intelligence, who never dimmed her light for anyone. But that girl was gone, worn away by years of being treated like an accessory, and tonight she would play the role Daniel needed her to play, one last time. They arrived at the venue separately. Daniel wanted to get there early to network, and he suggested she come later, after he'd made his initial rounds. Evelyn agreed, used to these arrangements by now. She showed up exactly when he'd asked, walking into the grand ballroom alone, and immediately felt the weight of eyes on her. The ballroom was stunning. 2-story ceilings with crystal chandeliers that threw dancing lights across the marble floors. Round tables covered in white linens, each centerpiece a cascade of white orchids and roses. A string quartet in the corner playing something classical and soothing. And everywhere, people. Hundreds of them, all dressed in their finest, all performing their version of success. Evelyn found Daniel near the bar, deep in conversation with a group of senior executives. She approached quietly, not wanting to interrupt. He saw her, and something flickered across his face, annoyance maybe, or anxiety, before he pasted on a smile. "There you are," he said, in a tone that sounded warm but wasn't. "Gentlemen, this is my wife, Evelyn." The men nodded politely. One of them, a silver-haired man she recognized as the CFO, extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Evelyn. What do you do?" It was a standard question, meaningless cocktail party chatter, but Evelyn saw Daniel tense. This was the moment he'd been dreading. She could save him, she knew. She could say something vague and redirect the conversation back to him. But something in her, some small rebellious spark, made her pause just long enough that the silence became noticeable. Daniel jumped in before she could answer. "Evelyn helps around," he said with a laugh that sounded forced. "Cleaning, organizing, you know. Nothing major." The words landed like stones. The executives nodded, their interest already fading. One of them made a comment about how important it was to have a stable home life when you're climbing the corporate ladder. The conversation moved on. Daniel looked relieved. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart exactly, that had been cracking for years, but some final illusion she'd been holding on to, some hope that he would, at the last moment, choose to honor her. He hadn't. He had reduced 15 years of marriage, her decades of professional achievement, her entire existence, to nothing major. She excused herself quietly and walked to an empty table on the far side of the room. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap, and waited. She didn't know what she was waiting for exactly. Maybe for the night to end. Maybe for the strength to decide what came next. Maybe for some sign that this marriage was worth saving. And then, across the room, she saw a woman watching her. Tall, black, elegant in a deep burgundy gown. The woman was standing with a group near the stage, but her attention was fixed on Evelyn. There was something in her expression, recognition maybe, or surprise. Evelyn didn't recognize her immediately, but there was something familiar about her face. The woman said something to the people around her, then started walking toward Evelyn's table. As she got closer, Evelyn's memory clicked into place. Patricia. Patricia Johnson. They had worked together almost 18 years ago on the Hartwell Industries rescue project, back when the company was on the brink of bankruptcy. Patricia had been a junior analyst back then, smart and hungry, and she and Evelyn had spent countless late nights in conference rooms filled with financial reports and failing strategies. Patricia had moved on to other companies after that project ended, climbing her own ladder. Evelyn had lost track of her, as she'd lost track of most people from that period of her life. Evelyn Ross, Patricia said, using Evelyn's maiden name. Or is it Crowell now? Evelyn stood, managing a smile. It's Crowell. Patricia. It's been a long time. Too long, Patricia said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice. I didn't know you'd be here tonight. Do you work with Hartwell now? No, Evelyn said quietly. I'm here with my husband. He works here. Ah, Patricia said, understanding something in Evelyn's tone. I just joined the board 6 months ago. I've been going through old company records, learning the history. I came across your name on the restructuring project from 2007. That was you, right? The consultant who saved this company? Evelyn nodded. That was a long time ago. Patricia's eyes narrowed slightly. Does Daniel know? I assume he's your husband, Daniel Crowell. I've heard good things about him. Evelyn didn't answer directly. It's complicated. Before Patricia could respond, the lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the formal program was about to begin. Patricia touched Evelyn's arm gently. Stay here. I think you'll want to see this. She walked back toward the stage, leaving Evelyn confused and slightly anxious. The CEO of Hartwell Industries, Jonathan Hartwell himself, took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He was in his late 60s, a man who had inherited the company from his father and nearly lost it before fighting his way back. He began with the standard acknowledgments, thanking everyone for coming, celebrating the company's recent successes, outlining the exciting expansion plans. Daniel was at a table near the front, sitting up straight, attentive, ready for his moment. The CEO talked about the importance of leadership, about the people who had shaped the company's trajectory. And then he said something that made the room go quiet. Before we announce tonight's promotions and new positions, I want to take a moment to acknowledge someone in this room whose contribution to Hartwell Industries can never be overstated. Someone who, nearly 2 decades ago, saved this company from complete collapse. Daniel's heart started beating faster. Was this about him? Had they decided to acknowledge his work in some special way? This person worked tirelessly for 18 months without a guaranteed paycheck, restructuring our entire operation, renegotiating contracts, identifying new markets, essentially rebuilding Hartwell from the ground up. And when we finally had the resources to offer this person a permanent executive position with significant equity, they declined. They said they preferred to work independently, to consult when needed, to live a life outside the corporate spotlight. The room was listening intently now, people leaning forward, curious about this mysterious figure from the company's past. Jonathan Hartwell looked out across the ballroom, his eyes searching. Mrs. Evelyn Crowell, would you please stand? For a moment, nothing happened. The name didn't register with most people in the room. They looked around, confused. Daniel felt his blood run cold. Evelyn. His Evelyn. No, that couldn't be right. There must be another Evelyn Crowell, some coincidence of names. But then he saw her, across the room, slowly standing up from a table he hadn't even noticed her sitting at. His wife. His wife who helped around and did nothing major. She was standing, and every eye in the room was turning toward her. Jonathan Hartwell smiled warmly. There you are. Ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn Crowell, formerly Evelyn Ross, the woman who saved Hartwell Industries. The applause started slowly, uncertainly, but it built. People were clapping even though most of them had no idea what they were clapping for, following the CEO's lead. Daniel sat frozen, his mind racing. This couldn't be real. This had to be some mistake, some bizarre confusion. But then the screens flanking the stage lit up with documents. Financial reports from 2007 showing Hartwell Industries in crisis. Revenue down 60%. Major clients leaving. Bankruptcy proceedings being prepared. And then another set of documents, proposals bearing the name Evelyn Ross, strategic recommendations, market analyses, restructuring plans. All time-stamped from late 2007 through early 2009. 18 months. The exact period right after he and Evelyn had gotten married. The period when he thought she was just staying home, maybe doing small freelance projects, supporting his career. Jonathan continued, his voice filling the room. Mrs. Crowell came to us through a referral from a colleague. She was young, relatively unknown, but she had a reputation for solving impossible problems. And Hartwell was definitely an impossible problem. We were arrogant back then, set in our ways, convinced we knew best. Evelyn didn't try to convince us with flashy presentations or corporate speak. She just quietly did the work. She spent weeks analyzing every aspect of our operation. She identified inefficiencies we'd been blind to for years. She found new revenue streams we'd never considered. She negotiated with creditors who had written us off. And slowly, over those 18 months, she turned us around. More images appeared on the screens. Graphs showing the recovery, revenue climbing back up, profit stabilizing, growth resuming. And in several photos from company meetings during that period, there was Evelyn, younger but unmistakable, sitting at conference tables, presenting to the board, working alongside the team that saved the company. Daniel recognized the time frame. 2007 to 2009. He had been so consumed with his own career during those years, working brutal hours to prove himself, that he barely noticed what Evelyn was doing. He remembered her being gone sometimes, saying she had meetings with a client. He remembered her working late nights at home, her laptop screen glowing in the dark. But he'd never asked for details. Never expressed interest. He'd assumed it was small stuff, forgettable projects, nothing that mattered. How could he have been so blind? Patricia Johnson had returned to the stage, standing beside Jonathan. She took the microphone. I was a junior analyst during the restructuring project. I got to work directly with Evelyn. I watched her turn chaos into order. But what impressed me most wasn't just her strategic brilliance, it was her humility. She never made anyone feel stupid. She never took credit publicly. She did the work because the work mattered, not because she wanted applause. When this company tried to give her equity, tried to make her a partner, she said no. She said she had consulting contracts with other companies that needed her, and she didn't want to be tied down. She wanted freedom. The room was completely silent now except for Patricia's voice. Over the years, Evelyn has consulted for Hartwell 7 more times on major projects. Every time, she did exceptional work. Every time, she charged standard consultant fees, nothing inflated despite her track record. And every time, she declined public recognition. Most of the employees here tonight have no idea that the strategic frameworks you're using, the market positioning that's made our recent expansion possible, originated from Evelyn's work. She asked that her contributions be credited to the internal team. She didn't want her name on anything. Patricia paused, letting that sink in. But when I joined the board 6 months ago and learned this history, I felt strongly that Evelyn's contribution needed to be acknowledged. Not for her sake, she doesn't need our validation, but for ours. Because in a world that mistakes volume for value, that confuses visibility with importance, we need reminders that the most powerful work is often done by people who never demand the spotlight. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because what happens next is the moment that changes everything, not just for Daniel and Evelyn, but for every single person in that room who ever underestimated someone based on appearances. Stay with me, this is where it gets devastating. Jonathan Hartwell took the microphone back. "I want to add something personal. When my father handed me this company in 2005, I thought I was ready. I thought my degree and my last name were enough. But by 2007, I had nearly destroyed everything he'd built. The shame of that almost broke me. When Evelyn came in, I resented her at first. Here was this young woman, barely 30, telling me everything I was doing wrong. My ego wanted to reject her. But she had a way of presenting hard truths that didn't destroy dignity. She made me understand that asking for help wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. She saved my company, yes, but she also saved me from becoming a cautionary tale about inherited failure." He paused, emotion evident in his voice. "Evelyn didn't just restructure our business. She restructured how we thought about leadership. She taught us that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the wisest. That the person taking credit is often not the person who did the work. And that real excellence doesn't need performance, it just needs opportunity." Jonathan looked directly at Evelyn, who was still standing, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "You asked that we never do this, never make a public acknowledgement. But tonight feels important. We're expanding into new territories, bringing in new leadership, and I think this team needs to understand the foundation they're building on. They need to know that Hartwell Industries exists today because of your genius, your dedication, and your refusal to let us fail." He set down the microphone and did something that shocked the room. He stepped down from the stage, walked across the ballroom floor, his footsteps echoing in the silence, and stopped directly in front of Evelyn. And then he bowed. Not a casual nod, but a full, formal bow of deep respect. The kind of bow that acknowledges a debt that can never be fully repaid. The board members rose from their seats. Patricia first, then the CFO, then the others, one by one. And they bowed too. The gesture rippled through the room like a wave. Senior executives standing, bowing. Department heads following suit. The entire ballroom, hundreds of people, rising to their feet to honor this woman that most of them had never heard of until 5 minutes ago. Daniel was still seated, paralyzed. His mind was a storm of incomprehensible thoughts. This was Evelyn. His Evelyn. The woman he'd just called a cleaner in front of senior partners. The woman he'd been systematically minimizing for years, treating like an embarrassment, like dead weight he was generous enough to carry. And she was this. She was brilliant. She was accomplished beyond anything he'd achieved. She was respected by people whose respect he'd been desperately chasing for decades. The senior partner who had asked what Evelyn did, the one Daniel had laughed off her significance to, was now standing 3 feet away, staring at Daniel with an expression that was hard to read. Pity. Disgust. Secondhand embarrassment. All of it, probably. Daniel finally stood, not to bow but because his legs moved automatically, some deep instinct telling him he needed to do something, anything, but he didn't know what. He couldn't bow. He couldn't not bow. He was trapped in the paralysis of public humiliation, the kind that burns itself into your identity forever. Evelyn's eyes found his across the room. There was no triumph in her expression. No vindication. Just a deep, bone-tired sadness. Because this moment, which should have felt like justice, just felt like loss. Loss of years they could have spent as real partners. Loss of the marriage they might have had if he'd ever bothered to see her. Loss of the man she'd fallen in love with, the one who talked about building a life together, before, together, became code for, watch me perform while you fade into the background. The bowing ended. People sat back down. The energy in the room had shifted completely. What was supposed to be a celebration of the company's future had become an acknowledgement of its past, and specifically, of the woman who'd rescued that past from disaster. Jonathan returned to the stage, but the program had been derailed. The carefully planned promotional announcements felt anticlimactic now. Daniel's name was mentioned as part of the new regional leadership team, but the applause was perfunctory. Everyone was still processing what they'd learned. The gala continued, but it was different. People kept glancing at Evelyn, whispering. Some approached her, introducing themselves, thanking her. She was gracious, humble, clearly wishing she could disappear. Daniel stood near the bar, alone. Colleagues who would normally be congratulating him on his promotion kept their distance, unsure how to interact with him now. The man who'd been rising through the ranks on his own merit, or so everyone thought, had just been revealed as the ungrateful husband who belittled the woman responsible for the very company he worked for. The optics were terrible. But worse than the optics was the truth. Daniel had to face the fact that he'd been taking credit, in his own mind if not explicitly, for a lifestyle and stability that Evelyn had provided. The nice house, he'd thought he'd bought it with his success. But now he remembered, really remembered, that conversation 5 years ago when they'd been approved for the mortgage. The loan officer had said something about Evelyn's income being a significant factor in their approval. Daniel hadn't paid attention. He'd been too focused on his own contribution. How much of their life had been funded by her work he'd never acknowledged, never respected, never even asked about. How many times had she paid for things, solved problems, carried weight he never noticed because he was too busy performing his own success. The gala ended earlier than scheduled. People filtered out, the energy deflated. Daniel looked for Evelyn and found her standing alone near the coat check, waiting. He approached slowly, afraid of what he might see in her face. "Evelyn," he started, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not here," she said quietly. "I'm going home. You can stay, network, do whatever you need to do. But I'm leaving." "I'll come with you," he said. "No," she said, and there was steel in her voice now. "You wanted this night to be about your career, about your advancement. So stay. Enjoy it. I'll be home whenever I get there." She took her coat and walked out, leaving Daniel standing in the emptying ballroom, surrounded by people who now saw him completely differently, but more importantly, seeing himself completely differently. He had spent 15 years building a professional reputation, and in one night, he'd revealed himself to be exactly the kind of person he'd always claimed to despise, someone who succeeded by diminishing others, who built himself up by tearing someone else down. Daniel didn't stay at the gala. He left 10 minutes after Evelyn, unable to bear the looks from colleagues, the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked by. He drove home in silence, his mind replaying every moment of the evening, every moment of the past 15 years. The house was dark when he arrived except for a light in the kitchen. Evelyn was sitting at the table with tea, still in her navy dress. She looked exhausted. Not from the event, but from years of carrying something heavy alone. Daniel sat down across from her. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the wrong question. He knew it as soon as the words left his mouth. Evelyn looked at him with an expression that was almost pitying. "I tried, Daniel. In the beginning, I tried so many times. Do you remember our second anniversary? I got a call during dinner from Jonathan Hartwell, thanking me because the restructuring had just shown its first positive quarter. You were annoyed that I took the call. You said it was rude to interrupt our dinner for work. I tried to explain what the call was about, what the project meant. You changed the subject after about 30 seconds. You started talking about your promotion to senior associate." She took a sip of tea, her hand steady. "Or the time we were at your company picnic, about 5 years ago. I was talking to one of the executives' wives, and I mentioned I did strategic consulting. She asked what kind, and I was explaining a project I just finished, and you pulled me aside and told me I was showing off. You said it made people uncomfortable when I talked about work in social settings. You told me to just keep it light, talk about hobbies or travel or something. Daniel remembered that conversation vaguely. He'd thought he was helping her, saving her from being boring. Now he understood he'd been trying to keep her small. After that, Evelyn continued, I stopped trying. It was clear you didn't want to know. You wanted a wife who supported your ambitions without having any of her own. Or at least, without any that competed with yours for attention. That's not fair, Daniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Evelyn asked. Tell me, what do you think I do, day to day? When I'm in my office working, what do you imagine I'm doing? Daniel opened his mouth and realized he had no answer. He'd never thought about it. He'd vaguely assumed she did small consulting projects, maybe some bookkeeping or administrative work for small businesses. The truth was embarrassing to admit. I don't know, he finally said. Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. I currently have 3 active clients. I'm helping a manufacturing company in Detroit restructure their supply chain to recover from tariff impacts. I'm consulting with a tech startup in Austin on their growth strategy and investor relations. And I'm working with a healthcare network in Florida on operational efficiency. My average project fee is between $200,000 and $500,000, depending on scope and duration. Last year, I made more than 3 times your salary. The numbers hit Daniel like physical blows. 3 times his salary. He'd been acting like he was supporting her, like she was lucky to have his income, while she was quietly earning more than he'd make in several years combined. The house, he said, the realization dawning. You paid for most of it, didn't you? I paid 2/3 of the down payment, Evelyn confirmed. You were between positions that year, remember? You'd left your previous job for the opportunity at Hartwell, but there was a 3-month gap. We would have lost the house we wanted if we'd waited for your income to stabilize. So I covered it. I told you at the time, but you weren't really listening. You were stressed about starting the new job, and I didn't want to add to your stress by making you feel inadequate. So I just handled it. Daniel felt sick. How many times had he talked about our house, feeling proud of the home he'd provided, never acknowledging that she'd made it possible? Why did you stay, he asked, and it was an honest question. If I was treating you so badly, why didn't you leave? Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Because I loved you. Because I remembered who you were when we first met. You weren't always like this, Daniel. When we started dating, you asked me about my work. You seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my projects. You valued my opinion. But then something changed. The higher you climbed professionally, the smaller you needed me to be. At first, I thought it was temporary, that once you felt more secure in your career, you'd come back to seeing me as a partner. But it just got worse. She set down her teacup. And honestly, I stayed because I'd seen what happens to successful women in marriages where their accomplishments threaten their husband's ego. They get divorced, and everyone whispers about how they're difficult, too ambitious, too much. I didn't want to be another statistic of a woman punished for her success. So I tried to make myself smaller. I tried to be the wife you seem to need. But tonight showed me that no matter how small I make myself, it will never be enough. Because the problem isn't my success. It's that you can't handle anyone else's success without seeing it as a threat to your own. Daniel wanted to argue. He wanted to defend himself, to say she was wrong, that he wasn't that petty, that insecure. But the evidence was overwhelming. He had introduced his wife as a cleaner. At a company she'd literally saved. In front of people who owed their jobs to her work. Because acknowledging who she really was would have meant acknowledging that he wasn't the most impressive person in the room, maybe not even in his own marriage. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 15 years of small betrayals, accumulated disappointments, and love that had been slowly suffocated by ego. I'm sorry, Daniel finally said, and he meant it. But he also knew sorry wasn't enough. Sorry doesn't erase years of disrespect. Sorry doesn't undo the public humiliation he'd subjected her to. Sorry doesn't rebuild trust that's been systematically demolished. Evelyn looked at him, and for the first time that night, he saw tears in her eyes. I know you are. But Daniel, I don't know if sorry fixes this. I don't know if we can come back from this. Do you want to try? He asked, afraid of the answer. She was quiet for so long he thought she might not answer at all. I don't know, she finally said. I need time to figure out what I want. Because here's what you need to understand. Tonight wasn't just humiliating for you. It was clarifying for me. I've spent 15 years making myself invisible so you could shine. I convinced myself it was love, that I was being supportive. But watching you tonight, hearing you reduce my entire existence to nothing major, in front of people who literally owe their careers to my work, I realized something. I've been complicit in my own erasure. I let you not see me because it was easier than fighting to be seen. And I can't do that anymore. Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. What does that mean? Are you leaving? I mean, I need space to remember who I am outside of being your wife. The woman who made herself small. I need to remember the woman I was before I started measuring my worth by how little I inconvenienced your ambitions. She stood up, picking up her teacup. I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow, I'm going to visit my sister in Boston for a while. A few weeks, maybe longer. You need that time too. You need to sit with what happened tonight and really think about who you've become. Not who you tell yourself you are, but who your actions reveal you to be. Evelyn, please, Daniel said, standing too. Don't do this. Let's talk. Let's figure this out together. We are figuring it out, she said quietly. But we can't do it together right now. Because every time we try to talk, you make it about your feelings, your embarrassment, your regret. And I need space to process my own hurt without having to manage yours too. That's part of the problem, Daniel. I've spent our entire marriage managing your emotions, protecting your ego, making everything easier for you. I'm tired. She walked toward the stairs, then paused. For what it's worth, I didn't want tonight to happen that way. I asked Jonathan years ago never to publicly acknowledge my work. I value my privacy, and I knew it would complicate things with you. But Patricia pushed for it. She felt strongly that the new leadership team needed to understand the company's history. And maybe she was right. Maybe you needed to hear it from someone else, because you certainly weren't listening when it came from me. She went upstairs, leaving Daniel alone in the kitchen with the wreckage of his marriage and the uncomfortable truth about who he'd become. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in the kitchen until dawn, going through his phone, looking at old photos, old messages, trying to pinpoint when things had gone so wrong. He found a text exchange from 6 years earlier. Evelyn had sent him a message during his workday, just finished a presentation for the healthcare client. I think they're going to accept the proposal. Feeling good about it. He'd responded 3 hours later with, that's great, babe. Can you pick up my dry cleaning on your way home? No congratulations. No questions about the project. Just an errand request. He scrolled further back. 7 years ago, she'd sent him, the Detroit project just landed. It's a big one, probably 6 months of work. We should celebrate. His response, cool. I'm swamped tonight though. Rain check. There was no follow-up. No rescheduled celebration. He'd just forgotten, moved on to his own priorities. And she'd let it go, as she always did. He found a voice message from 8 years ago that he'd apparently never listened to, just dismissed. He played it now. Evelyn's voice, younger, more energetic. Hey, I know you're in your meeting, but I had to tell someone. Remember that startup I've been consulting with? They just got acquired for $40 million, and the CEO credits our strategic repositioning as a major factor in making them attractive to buyers. I'm really proud of this one. Okay, call me when you can. Love you. Daniel checked his call log from that day. He'd never called her back. The weight of his failures was crushing. It wasn't one big betrayal. It was 1,000 small ones. 1,000 moments where her joy, her success, her whole inner life had been invisible to him because he was too consumed with his own trajectory to notice anyone else's. As the sun rose, Daniel made a decision. He couldn't fix this immediately. He probably couldn't fix it at all. But he could start by figuring out why he'd become this person, and whether there was any version of himself worth salvaging. Monday morning came too soon. Daniel went into the office dreading the inevitable conversations, the looks, the changed dynamics. He wasn't wrong to dread it. The first person he ran into was Marcus Chen, a colleague who'd been at his table during the gala. "Hey man," Marcus said, awkward. "That was, quite a night on Saturday." "Yeah," Daniel said, not sure what else to say. "Look, I don't mean to pile on, but people are talking. The consensus is pretty much that you're either incredibly stupid or incredibly cruel, and nobody can figure out which is worse." Marcus's bluntness stung, but Daniel appreciated the honesty. "Probably both," Daniel admitted. "I didn't know about any of it. About what she'd done for the company, about her career. I never asked." Marcus looked at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "You never asked? Dude, she's your wife. How do you not know what your wife does for a living?" It was the question everyone would ask, Daniel realized. The question he'd been asking himself all weekend. How do you live with someone for 15 years and not know them at all? "I thought I knew," Daniel said. "I thought she did small consulting projects, nothing significant. She never corrected me." "Did she need to correct you?" Marcus asked. "Or did you need to pay attention?" It was a fair point. Daniel had no defense. "The promotion," Daniel said, changing the subject. "Is it still happening?" Marcus grimaced. "I don't know, man. There's been talk. Some of the board members are questioning whether someone with such poor judgment in their personal life can be trusted with regional oversight. And there's the optics problem. How does it look that we're promoting the guy who publicly disrespected the woman who literally saved the company?" Daniel nodded. He'd expected this. "I'll talk to Jonathan." "Good luck with that," Marcus said, walking away. Daniel went to his office and found an email waiting from Jonathan Hartwell's assistant. "Mr. Hartwell would like to see you at 10 a.m. Please confirm receipt." It wasn't a request. Daniel confirmed and spent the next hour preparing for what he knew would be an uncomfortable conversation. At 10 sharp, he was in Jonathan's office. The CEO's corner suite overlooked the city, glass walls giving a panoramic view of the skyline Daniel had always aspired to be part of. Jonathan was standing at the window, hands in his pockets. He didn't turn around immediately when Daniel entered. "Sit down, Daniel," Jonathan said, still facing the window. Daniel sat, waiting. The silence stretched. Finally, Jonathan turned around. His face was hard to read, not angry exactly, but deeply disappointed. "I've been thinking about what happened Saturday night," Jonathan began. "Trying to understand how we got there. How you could work for this company for over a decade and not know its history. How you could be married to Evelyn Crowell and not understand who she is." "Sir, Daniel started. "I'm not finished," Jonathan cut him off. "I promoted you, Daniel. Multiple times. I trusted your judgment, your leadership potential. I recommended you for the regional position. But Saturday night revealed something about your character that I find deeply troubling. You're willing to diminish someone else to elevate yourself. You're willing to take credit, even implicitly, for success you didn't earn. And most damning, you don't have the curiosity or humility to understand the people around you." Jonathan sat down at his desk. "Evelyn called me yesterday. She wanted to make sure Saturday night wouldn't negatively impact your career. Even after what you did, she was trying to protect you. Do you understand how remarkable that is? How rare. Daniel felt shame burn through him. She's extraordinary. Yes, she is, Jonathan agreed. Which makes your treatment of her even more incomprehensible. The regional position, Jonathan continued, is being put on hold. Not cancelled, but delayed. The board wants to see how you handle the next 6 months. How you respond to this situation will tell us everything we need to know about whether you're the leader we thought you were. Daniel nodded. It was better than being fired, which he'd half expected. I understand. Do you? Jonathan asked. Because I'm not sure you do. This isn't about public relations or optics. This is about fundamental character. The kind of leader we need isn't someone who succeeds by making others smaller. It's someone who succeeds by making others bigger. Evelyn understood that. She made this entire company bigger, and she did it without needing credit or recognition. That's leadership. What you did Saturday night. That's ego. The meeting ended shortly after. Daniel walked back to his office feeling like he'd been stripped down to his most basic, flawed self, and found wanting. That evening, Daniel came home to a house that felt emptier than it had any right to. Evelyn's car wasn't in the driveway. He went inside and found a note on the kitchen counter. Daniel, I've left for Boston. I need time away from this house, from these routines, from the role I've been playing. I'm not sure when I'll be back. Please don't call unless it's an emergency. I'll reach out when I'm ready to talk. Take care of yourself. Evelyn. Short, direct, final. Daniel read it 3 times, as if the words might change or reveal some hidden warmth. They didn't. He walked through the house, noticing details he'd never paid attention to. The paintings on the walls, he'd always assumed they were random decor, but looking closer now, he saw they were originals, signed by an artist whose name he didn't recognize. Had Evelyn chosen these? Bought them? He didn't know. The bookshelf in the living room was filled with books he'd never looked at closely. Business strategy texts. Economic theory. Biographies of corporate leaders. All well-worn, clearly read multiple times. This was her library, her intellectual landscape, and he'd walked past it for years without ever being curious about what she was reading, what she was thinking about. He went to her home office, a room he rarely entered. It was organized but lived in. Her desk had a large monitor, notebooks filled with handwritten notes, project files neatly labeled. On the wall was a framed photo he didn't recognize. It showed Evelyn with a group of people, all wearing business casual, standing in front of a building with a grand opening banner. She looked younger, vibrant, proud. He had no idea what the photo was from, what company, what project. Another piece of her life he'd never asked about. Daniel sat down in her desk chair and did something he'd never done before. He looked at her calendar, not to snoop but to understand. It was full. Color-coded meetings. Detroit Manufacturing, Progress Review. Austin Tech, Investor Strategy Session. Florida Healthcare, Site Visit. Conference calls scheduled across different time zones. She was managing multiple complex projects simultaneously, coordinating teams, traveling regularly, and he'd somehow convinced himself she was just helping around. The depth of his ignorance was staggering. He opened one of her notebooks, the current one based on the dates. Her handwriting was neat, methodical. Notes from client meetings. Strategic framework sketched out. Questions she needed to research. And occasionally, personal notes to herself. One from 3 months ago caught his eye, Daniel's promotion celebration tonight. Remember to be supportive. Don't mention the Florida contract, even though it's the biggest of my career. This night is about him. Daniel felt something crack inside his chest. She'd landed the biggest contract of her career, and she'd hidden it so his celebration wouldn't be overshadowed. She'd made herself invisible so he could shine, and he'd never even noticed the sacrifice. Another note from 6 months ago, anniversary tomorrow. Daniel forgot to make plans again. That's okay. Book the restaurant myself. He's stressed about the Peterson account. Be patient. She'd been managing his emotions, protecting his ego, arranging their life so his failures didn't sting, all while building a career that dwarfed his. And he'd responded by introducing her as cleaning staff. The next few weeks were the hardest of Daniel's life. He went to work, did his job, came home to an empty house. He tried to fill the silence with television, with work projects, with anything that would keep him from thinking. It didn't work. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of Evelyn. Not just her physical presence, but her impact on his life. The meals in the freezer she'd prepared before leaving, labeled with heating instructions. The bills that were automatically paid because she'd set up the systems. The garden that stayed alive because she'd hired a service before she left. Even in her absence, she was taking care of things, and he was just now noticing. He tried calling her once, despite her request for space. She didn't answer. He left a voicemail, "Evelyn, it's me. I know you said not to call. I wanted to hear your voice. I'm trying to understand what happened. Not just Saturday night, but all of it. How I became this person. I'm so sorry. Not just for the gala, but for years of not seeing you. Call me when you're ready. Or don't. I'll understand either way." She didn't call back. Daniel started therapy. It was something he'd always dismissed as unnecessary, something for people who couldn't handle life. But he was beginning to realize he was exactly that person. He couldn't handle life, not really. He could handle the performance of life, the external markers of success, but the actual substance, the relationships and self-awareness and humility, he was failing at all of it. His therapist, Dr. Reeves, was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense approach. In their first session, she asked him why he was there. "My wife is leaving me," Daniel said. "Because I've been, I don't know, a terrible husband, I guess." "You guess?" Dr. Reeves asked. "Or you know?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "I know. I definitely know now." Over the following sessions, they unpacked his relationship with success, with validation, with his fear of being ordinary. Dr. Reeves helped him see that his treatment of Evelyn wasn't really about her at all. It was about his own insecurity, his terror of not being enough. "You saw her success as a threat," Dr. Reeves explained in one session. "Not consciously, perhaps, but on some level, you understood that if people knew how accomplished she was, they might not be as impressed with you. So you minimized her. You made her small so you could feel big." "That's a horrible thing to do," Daniel said. "Yes," Dr. Reeves agreed. "But it's also a very human thing to do when we're operating from fear instead of love. The question is, can you stop operating from fear? Can you learn to celebrate someone else's success without feeling diminished by it?" Daniel didn't know. He wanted to say yes, but the honest answer was he didn't know if he was capable of that kind of emotional generosity. At work, the fallout continued. The regional position was officially put on hold indefinitely. Daniel's colleagues treated him politely but distantly. He'd become a cautionary tale, the guy who didn't appreciate what he had until everyone else saw it. One afternoon, he ran into Patricia Johnson in the elevator. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. "How's Evelyn?" she asked. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "She's in Boston. She's not talking to me." Patricia nodded. "I owe you an apology," she said unexpectedly. Daniel looked at her, confused. "For what?" "For pushing Jonathan to acknowledge Evelyn publicly. She didn't want it. She specifically asked years ago that her contribution remain private. But I thought, I don't know, I thought the truth should come out. I thought this company needed to know its history. I didn't think about how it would affect you. Or more accurately, I didn't care how it would affect you. I was angry on Evelyn's behalf. All those years of her brilliance being invisible while while other people got promoted and celebrated. Patricia paused. But watching what happened, seeing your marriage fall apart publicly, I realize I weaponized information that wasn't mine to weaponize. So I'm sorry. Not for telling the truth, but for the way I told it. Daniel appreciated the apology, even though he didn't fully agree with it. You didn't ruin my marriage, he said. I did that myself, over years. You just exposed what was already broken. The elevator reached Patricia's floor. As she stepped out, she turned back. For what it's worth, Evelyn still loves you. Or she did, as of last week. We've been talking. She's trying to figure out if love is enough when respect is gone. I don't have an answer for her. I'm not sure anyone does. 6 weeks after the gala, Daniel got an unexpected visit at work. The receptionist called his office. There's someone here to see you. She says her name is Margaret Ross. Ross. Evelyn's maiden name. Daniel's heart jumped. Was it Evelyn? But no, the receptionist had said Margaret. Evelyn's mother. Daniel hadn't seen Margaret in years. Evelyn's parents lived in Seattle, and they didn't visit often. The relationship between Daniel and his in-laws had always been cordial but distant. Now he understood why. They'd probably seen what he was doing to their daughter long before he'd seen it himself. Margaret Ross was in her early 70s, elegant and sharp-eyed. She stood when Daniel entered the reception area, and he noticed she didn't smile. Margaret, he said, uncertain. Can we talk somewhere private? She asked. It wasn't really a question. They went to a small conference room. Daniel offered coffee, which she declined. They sat across from each other at the table, and Margaret looked at him with an expression that made him feel like a child called to the principal's office. Evelyn didn't tell me she'd asked you to visit, Daniel said, trying to fill the uncomfortable silence. She didn't, Margaret said. She doesn't know I'm here. I'm in town visiting her in Boston, and I decided to make a detour to have this conversation. Okay, Daniel said, bracing himself. Margaret folded her hands on the table. I'm going to be very direct with you, Daniel, because I don't have patience for dancing around difficult topics at my age. You've broken my daughter's heart. Not once, not recently, but systematically over the course of your marriage. And I want to understand why. Daniel felt defensive instincts rise up, then forced them down. I don't have a good answer, he said honestly. I didn't see her. I didn't value her. I was so focused on my own career, my own validation, that I turned her into a supporting character in my story instead of recognizing she had her own story, probably a better story than mine. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, Do you know what Evelyn said to me when you first started dating? She said, Mom, I finally found someone who asks me questions. Who wants to know what I think, not just what I can do for them. She was so happy, Daniel. She thought she'd found a partner. The words hit Daniel like accusations, which they were. I remember being that person, he said quietly. I remember being genuinely interested in her. I remember thinking she was the most interesting woman I'd ever met. I don't know when that changed. Or maybe I do know, and I just don't want to admit it. It changed when I started measuring my worth by external validation. Every promotion, every recognition, I needed more. And somewhere in that process, I started seeing her quietness, her contentment with working without recognition, as a weakness instead of a strength. Margaret's expression softened slightly. At least you're being honest now. That's more than I expected. She leaned forward. I'm not here to tell you whether to fight for your marriage or let her go. That's between you and Evelyn. But I am here to tell you something about my daughter that maybe you've forgotten, or maybe you never knew. Evelyn is the strongest person I know. Not because she's tough or unfeeling, but because she has the strength to be vulnerable, to love without guarantee, to work without needing applause. That kind of strength is rare. Most people, they need constant affirmation that they matter. Evelyn knows she matters. She doesn't need the world to tell her. But she did need her husband to see it. And you didn't. Daniel nodded, unable to speak around the lump in his throat. Can I ask you something? Margaret said. What do you actually want? Do you want Evelyn back because you love her, or because losing her makes you look bad? Because those are two very different things, and she deserves to know which one it is. It was the question Daniel had been avoiding asking himself. Did he want Evelyn back because he genuinely loved her and wanted to be better, or because her absence reflected poorly on him, because losing her meant losing a piece of his carefully constructed image? I don't know, Daniel admitted, and it was perhaps the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. I miss her. But I'm not sure if I miss her, or if I missed the version of our life where I got to feel superior. I'm in therapy trying to figure that out. Margaret stood up. Good. Keep figuring it out. And Daniel, if you do decide you want her back, understand that it won't be the same marriage. It can't be. Evelyn has spent enough of her life making herself smaller for someone else's comfort. If she comes back, and that's a big if, it will be as her full self. Can you handle that? Can you handle being married to a woman who's more successful than you, who's more respected in your industry than you'll probably ever be? Can you celebrate that instead of feeling threatened by it? I want to say yes, Daniel said. But I honestly don't know if I'm capable of it. Then keep doing the work until you know, Margaret said. She walked to the door, then paused. Evelyn told me what you said at the gala. She helps around. Cleaning. Nothing major. Do you know what hurt her most about that moment wasn't the public humiliation, it was the realization that that's actually how you saw her. That after 15 years of marriage, you genuinely believed her life was nothing major. That's what she's processing in Boston, Daniel. Not whether she can forgive you, but whether she can forgive herself for staying so long with someone who saw her as nothing. Margaret left, and Daniel sat alone in the conference room for a long time, staring at nothing, trying to figure out who he was and who he wanted to become. In Boston, Evelyn was staying with her younger sister, Rachel, in a small brownstone in Back Bay. Rachel was a professor of literature at Boston University, divorced, living alone with 2 cats and approximately 5,000 books. The sisters had always been close, despite their different paths. Rachel had chosen academia, a world of ideas and teaching. Evelyn had chosen business, a world of strategies and solutions. But both had chosen paths that valued substance over show, and that common ground had kept them connected even when life pulled them in different directions. Mom went to see Daniel, Rachel said one morning over coffee. They were sitting in her small kitchen, rain pattering against the windows. Evelyn looked up, surprised. She what? I told her not to get involved. When has Mom ever listened to that kind of directive? Rachel asked with a small smile. Are you angry? I don't know, Evelyn said. What did she say to him? She didn't tell me specifics. Just that she needed to look him in the eye and understand whether he was worth your pain. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. And what did she conclude? She said he's lost. That he knows he messed up but doesn't know how to be different. She said he's in therapy, which surprised her. She didn't think he had the humility for that. Evelyn nodded. Daniel had texted her once to tell her he'd started therapy. She hadn't responded, but she'd been glad to hear it. Do you miss him? Rachel asked. It was the question everyone kept asking, and Evelyn still didn't have a clear answer. I miss who he used to be. I miss the man who asked me questions, who valued my thoughts. But that man's been gone for a long time. I don't know if I miss who he became, or if I just miss not being alone. Those are two very different things, Rachel observed. I know. Evelyn had been doing her own therapy in Boston. Her therapist, Dr. Kim, was helping her understand her own role in the marriage's dysfunction. It was easy to cast Daniel as the villain, and he certainly had been the primary source of harm, but Evelyn was learning that she'd enabled the dynamic by continually making herself smaller, by never demanding to be seen. You trained him to dismiss you, Dr. Kim had said in one session, not unkindly. Every time he minimized your work and you didn't correct him, you reinforced that it was acceptable. Every time you hid your success to protect his ego, you taught him that his comfort was more important than your truth. I was trying to save my marriage, Evelyn had protested. Were you? Dr. Kim asked. Or were you trying to avoid the confrontation that might have actually saved it? Because there's a difference between supporting your partner and erasing yourself for them. You weren't supporting Daniel. You were enabling his worst instincts. It was hard to hear, but it was true. Evelyn had been so afraid of being seen as too much, too successful, too intimidating, that she'd become too little. She'd shrunk herself down to a size that felt safe, and in doing so, she'd become invisible even to herself. I don't know who I am anymore, Evelyn told Rachel one evening. They were walking along the Charles River, watching the last light fade from the sky. I've spent so long being Daniel's wife, being the woman who doesn't make waves, that I've forgotten who Evelyn is outside of that role. So figure it out, Rachel said simply. You've got time. You've got resources. You've got a career you're brilliant at. Figure out who you are and what you want, and then decide if Daniel fits into that life. What if he doesn't? Evelyn asked. Then you'll grieve and move on, Rachel said. You're not a coward, Evelyn. You're one of the bravest people I know. You rebuilt entire companies. You can rebuild your own life. That night, alone in Rachel's guest room, Evelyn started making lists. It was what she did when facing complex problems, break them down into manageable components. The first list was titled, What I Know About Myself. She wrote, I'm intelligent. I'm good at solving complex problems. I value quiet over noise. I don't need recognition to feel fulfilled. I'm capable of deep love. I'm resilient. I'm worthy of respect. The second list was, What I Want from Life. She wrote, Work that matters. Relationships based on mutual respect. A partner who sees me. To stop apologizing for my success. To take up space without guilt. To be known, really known, by the people I love. A home that feels like mine, not just a place I exist in. To matter, not just serve. The third list was the hardest. What I need from Daniel if we're going to rebuild. She stared at the blank page for a long time before writing, genuine curiosity about my life. Equal partnership, not performance. Acknowledgement of the harm he's caused, without defensiveness. Consistent action that matches his words. Therapy, ongoing. Humility. The ability to celebrate my success without feeling diminished. To be seen as a full person, not an accessory. Trust, rebuilt over time through reliability. And most importantly, the willingness to love me as I actually am, not as who he needs me to be. Looking at the lists, Evelyn realized something. Even if Daniel could become the person she needed, even if he did all the work and made all the changes, she still had to decide if she wanted to stay in a marriage that had caused her so much pain. Love wasn't enough. History wasn't enough. The question was whether the possibility of something better was worth the risk of more hurt. 3 months after the gala, Daniel was a different person, or at least he was trying to be. Therapy with Dr. Reeves had been brutal and necessary. She'd helped him see patterns he'd been blind to his entire adult life. His constant need for validation stemmed from growing up in a household where love felt conditional, where his father's approval came only when Daniel achieved something measurable. He'd carried that into his career, into his marriage, always performing, never just being. You don't know how to exist without an audience, Dr. Reeves had told him. Even alone, you're performing for some imaginary observer. You've never developed an internal sense of worth. It all comes from external sources. That's why Evelyn's quiet competence threatened you. She didn't need the applause, which made you feel like your need for it was a weakness. It was a devastating insight, but also clarifying. Daniel started doing something he'd never done before, tracking his daily habits and thought patterns. Dr. Reeves had given him a journal and asked him to write down every time he felt the urge to talk about his accomplishments, every time he felt threatened by someone else's success, every time he made a choice to protect his ego rather than connect with another person. The results were humiliating. He did it constantly. In meetings, he redirected conversations back to his projects. In casual conversations with friends, he found ways to mention his achievements. Even in therapy, he caught himself trying to impress Dr. Reeves with his self-awareness, performing insight rather than actually developing it. But slowly, with painful effort, he started to change. He began asking colleagues about their work and actually listening to the answers. He stopped checking his phone during conversations. He volunteered for projects that wouldn't get him recognition but would help the team. It felt unnatural at first, like wearing clothes that didn't fit. But gradually, something shifted. He started finding satisfaction in work for its own sake, not for the praise it might bring. He started enjoying conversations where he wasn't the center of attention. He started, for the first time in his adult life, to develop a sense of self that wasn't entirely dependent on others' perceptions. At work, his reputation began to slowly rehabilitate. People noticed the changes. Marcus Chen, who'd been brutally honest after the gala, pulled him aside one day. "I don't know what you're doing, man, but keep doing it. You're different. Better." "Thanks," Daniel said, and meant it. For months after the gala, Daniel did something that terrified him. He reached out to some of Evelyn's former clients, the ones he'd learned about from her calendar and project files. He wasn't trying to interfere with her work, he was trying to understand it. He met with the CEO of the Detroit manufacturing company over video call. Mr. Crowell, the CEO, a woman named Susan Tran, greeted him warmly. "Evelyn mentioned you might reach out. How can I help?" "I'm trying to understand my wife's work," Daniel said honestly. "I realize that sounds ridiculous, being married to her for 15 years and not understanding what she does. But that's the truth. I took her for granted, and I'm trying to correct that, even if it's too late." Susan's expression softened. "It takes courage to admit that. What do you want to know?" "Everything," Daniel said. "What she did for your company. How she works. Why you value her." Over the next hour, Susan walked him through the project Evelyn had led for them. Their supply chain had been decimated by tariff changes, and they were losing money on every product they shipped. Evelyn had spent 3 months analyzing their entire operation, then proposed a complete restructuring that seemed radical at the time. "We were skeptical," Susan admitted. Some of her recommendations meant completely changing how we'd done business for 30 years. But she had this way of presenting data that made the path forward undeniable. And she never made us feel stupid for not seeing it ourselves. She had extraordinary emotional intelligence alongside her strategic brilliance. "She saved your company?" Daniel asked. Without question, Susan confirmed. "We'd be bankrupt without her. And the crazy thing is, she charged us a fraction of what a big consulting firm would have cost. When I told her we wanted to pay her more, that her work was worth significantly more than her quote, she declined. She said she charged what she thought was fair, and she didn't believe in extracting maximum value just because she could. I've never met anyone else in business with that kind of integrity." Daniel felt pride and shame in equal measure. Pride that his wife was this person, shame that he'd never bothered to know it. He had similar conversations with representatives from her other clients. Each one painted a picture of a woman who was not only brilliant but humble, not only strategic but deeply empathetic, not only successful but principled. He began to understand that Evelyn wasn't just good at her job. She was exceptional in a way that had nothing to do with titles or public recognition. She changed organizations and people's lives, and she did it without needing anyone to witness it. That was power he'd never understood, power that didn't announce itself but transformed everything it touched. 5 months after the gala, Daniel made a decision. He wrote Evelyn a letter. Not an email, not a text, but an actual handwritten letter. It took him hours, and he rewrote it multiple times, trying to find words that were honest without being manipulative, that took responsibility without making excuses. The final version read, "Dear Evelyn, I don't know if you're ready to hear from me. Your silence has been clear, and I've tried to respect it, even though every day without you has been its own kind of education and loss. I'm not writing to ask you to come back. I'm not writing to defend myself. I'm writing because I've learned some things in these months apart, and you deserve to know them. I was wrong. Not just at the gala, though that was the most visible manifestation of my failures. I was wrong in how I saw you, in how I treated you, in how I built a life where your contributions were invisible even to me. I was wrong to make you small so I could feel big. I was wrong to take credit, even silently, for a life you built as much as I did. I was wrong to never ask questions, to never be curious about your work, your thoughts, your whole inner world that existed beyond being my wife. I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I became that person. Not to excuse it, but to make sure I never become him again. I've learned that I tied my entire sense of worth to external validation, to titles and recognition and other people's perception of my success. I was terrified of being ordinary, so I needed everyone around me to be less extraordinary by comparison. Including you. Especially you, because you were the person closest to me, and your quiet brilliance was the most threatening to my fragile ego. I've spent these months talking to your former clients, reading about your projects, trying to understand the work you do and why it matters. Evelyn, you've changed entire organizations. You've saved companies from bankruptcy. You've helped hundreds, maybe thousands of people keep their jobs by restructuring failing businesses. You've done all this without press releases, without awards, without any of the performance that I thought was necessary for success to count. And I'm in awe of you. Not just your intelligence, though that's undeniable, but your character. Your integrity. Your humility. The way you do the work because the work matters, not because it might lead to applause. I understand now what I destroyed. Not just a marriage, but a partnership with someone extraordinary who loved me enough to make herself invisible so I could shine. And that love, that sacrifice, I met it with dismissal and contempt. I called your life's work nothing major, in front of people who literally owe their careers to you. I can't undo that. I can't take back years of small cruelties that added up to a systematic erasure of who you are. But I can tell you that I see you now. Finally. Fully. And I can tell you that I'm trying to become someone worthy of seeing you, someone who can love without needing to dominate, who can celebrate without needing to compete. I don't know if that's enough. I don't know if love and effort can rebuild trust that was shattered over years of neglect. But I wanted you to know that I'm trying. Not for show, not to win you back, but because I finally understand that becoming a better person is the work that matters most, whether we end up together or apart. You deserve a partner who sees you, who values you, who never makes you choose between being loved and being yourself. I wasn't that partner. I don't know if I can become him, but I'm trying. I hope you're finding peace in Boston. I hope Rachel is taking good care of you. I hope you're remembering who you are outside of being my wife, because that person, the full, brilliant, powerful version of you that I tried to dim, that's who deserves to take up space in this world. With love and regret, Daniel. He mailed the letter to Rachel's address and then waited, not for a response necessarily, but just for the feeling of having finally told the complete truth. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning. Rachel brought it to Evelyn with coffee, setting both down on the small table where Evelyn had been working on a client proposal. It's from Daniel, Rachel said. I recognize his handwriting from your wedding invitation. Evelyn stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. She read the letter slowly, twice, letting the words settle. When she finished, she set it down and looked out the window at the Boston street below, busy with morning traffic and people hurrying to work. What does it say? Rachel asked gently. Evelyn handed her the letter. Rachel read it in silence, then looked up. He's doing the work. Maybe, Evelyn said. Or maybe he's performing the work, which isn't the same thing. You don't believe him? Rachel asked. I do not believe him, Evelyn said carefully. I believe he's in therapy. I believe he's had some revelations. I believe he's trying. What I don't know is whether trying is enough, or whether the foundation of our marriage is too damaged to rebuild. She stood up, pacing the small room. For 15 years, I made myself smaller. I convinced myself it was love, that I was being supportive. But really, I was enabling him. I was teaching him that my erasure was acceptable. And even if he changes, even if he becomes this evolved, self-aware person, I have to ask myself, do I want to go back to a marriage that required me to disappear? That's the real question, isn't it? Rachel said. Not whether Daniel can change, but whether you want the life that would mean. Evelyn nodded. Over the next few weeks, she thought constantly about Daniel's letter, about their marriage, about what she wanted for her future. She talked to Dr. Kim about it in therapy. What are you afraid of? Dr. Kim asked. I'm afraid of going back and falling into the same patterns, Evelyn admitted. I'm afraid that no matter how much he's changed, I'll revert to being the woman who makes herself small. Because that's the role I played for so long, it's familiar. It feels safe in some twisted way. And if you don't go back? Dr. Kim prompted. I'm afraid of being alone, Evelyn said quietly. I'm 44 years old. The idea of starting over, of building a new life from scratch, it's terrifying. And despite everything, I still love him. Or I love who he was, who he might become. I don't know. It's confusing. Love isn't enough, Dr. Kim said. You know that intellectually. But do you believe it emotionally? Evelyn thought about it. I'm starting to. These months in Boston, being away from Daniel, from our routines, from the role of wife that I've been playing for so long, I've remembered who I am. I've remembered that I'm interesting, that my work matters, that I can be happy without constant validation from a partner. And I like that version of myself. I'm afraid of losing her again. Then maybe the question isn't whether Daniel has changed enough, Dr. Kim suggested. Maybe it's whether you've changed enough to protect yourself if you go back. 6 months after the gala, Evelyn made a decision. She called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. Evelyn. His voice was rough, like he'd been waiting for this call for so long he'd almost given up hope. Hi, she said. There was so much to say, but she didn't know where to start. I got your letter. Thank you for writing it. For being honest. I meant every word, Daniel said. I know, Evelyn said. And I've been thinking about it. About us. About whether there's an us to rebuild. Daniel waited, not interrupting, and Evelyn appreciated that. The old Daniel would have jumped in, would have tried to convince her, would have made it about his feelings. This restraint felt new. I think we need to talk, Evelyn continued. In person. Not to get back together, not yet, but to have the conversations we should have had years ago. To decide if there's a foundation worth building on, or if we're just holding on to something that ended a long time ago but neither of us wanted to admit it. I'll come to Boston, Daniel offered immediately. No, Evelyn said. I'll come home. It's time. I've been hiding here for 6 months, and that was necessary, but I can't build a new life by running from the old one. I need to come back and face it. When? Daniel asked. Next week, Evelyn said. I have some projects to wrap up here, and then I'll fly back. Can you book us a session with a marriage counselor? I want a professional there for our first real conversation. I don't trust us to do it alone without falling into old patterns. I'll find someone, Daniel promised. And Evelyn? I'm glad you're willing to try. Even if you ultimately decide you can't stay, I'm glad we'll have the chance to talk honestly. They hung up, and Evelyn sat for a long time, wondering if she was making the right choice. But she realized there wasn't a right choice, not really. There was just the choice to face the truth of her marriage and her own role in its dysfunction, and then decide what to do with that knowledge. Evelyn returned to their home on a Sunday afternoon. The house looked the same but felt different, or maybe she was different and that changed how everything looked. Daniel had cleaned obsessively, she could tell. Everything was organized, dusted, perfect in a way that their home had never quite been when they lived together. He was trying too hard, she thought, and then felt guilty for the criticism. He was trying. That was what she'd wanted. The marriage counselor, Dr. Monica Torres, had an office in a renovated Victorian house downtown. They met there on Tuesday evening, sitting in a room with soft lighting and comfortable chairs that were angled toward each other but not directly facing, designed to make difficult conversations less confrontational. Dr. Torres was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a calm presence that immediately put Evelyn at ease. Thank you both for coming, Dr. Torres began. I've spoken with each of you individually over the phone, so I have some context. But I want to start by establishing what we're doing here. This is not about saving your marriage necessarily. It's about creating a space where you can both be honest about what happened, about what you need, and about whether this relationship can become something healthy. Does that work for you both? Daniel and Evelyn both nodded. Good, Dr. Torres said. Let's start with you, Evelyn. Can you tell Daniel, in your own words, how the last 15 years have felt for you? Evelyn took a breath. This was the part she'd been dreading and needing in equal measure. It felt like drowning in slow motion, she began. Not all at once, but gradually, year by year, I felt myself disappearing. In the beginning, I thought I was being supportive. You were building your career, Daniel, and I thought my role was to make that easier for you. But somewhere along the way, being supportive turned into being invisible. And the worst part was that I let it happen. I made myself smaller because it was easier than fighting to be seen. I hid my success because I was afraid it would threaten you. I stopped talking about my work because you never seemed interested. I became this quiet, background presence in my own life, and I convinced myself that was love. She looked at Daniel, who was listening intently, his face a mixture of pain and concentration. The night of the gala, when you introduced me as cleaning staff, that wasn't the betrayal. That was just the public revelation of how you'd been seeing me all along. The betrayal was every day before that, when you walked past my office and never asked what I was working on. When you talked about our house as something you provided, never acknowledging that I'd paid for most of it. When you corrected my grammar at parties like I was an embarrassment. When you scheduled your life and just expected me to fit into it without ever asking what my schedule was. Evelyn felt tears starting but pushed through. You treated me like I was lucky to be married to you. Like you were doing me a favor by keeping me around. And I let you, because I was afraid of being alone, afraid of being too much, afraid of being one of those women people whisper about as too ambitious or too successful for a man to handle. So I became too little instead. And that's on me as much as it's on you. Daniel looked like he wanted to respond, but Dr. Torres held up a hand. Let her finish. I don't know if I can come back from that, Evelyn continued. Not from what you did, but from what I did to myself. I don't know if I can trust myself to be in this marriage and not revert to being that small, invisible version of myself. Because it's a pattern now, Daniel. It's ingrained. And even if you've changed, even if you promise to see me and value me, I'm not sure I can break the habit of hiding. She wiped her eyes. So that's where I am. I still love you. But I don't know if love is enough when the relationship taught me to hate myself. The room was quiet except for the sound of Daniel crying. Not loud, but visible, tears running down his face that he didn't try to hide. Dr. Torres let the silence sit for a moment, then turned to Daniel. "What do you want to say?" Daniel cleared his throat, trying to compose himself. "I'm so sorry. I've said that before, but hearing you describe it, hearing how it felt from your side, I'm devastated by what I did to you. To us." He turned to face Evelyn directly. "You're right about all of it. I did treat you like you were lucky to be with me. I did take credit for a life you built. I did make you invisible. And the worst part is I didn't even realize I was doing it. I genuinely thought I was the provider, the successful one, the one carrying our life forward. I had rewritten our entire history in my head to cast myself as the hero and you as the supporting character." He took a shaky breath. "I don't have an excuse. I was selfish and insecure and so terrified of being ordinary that I needed everyone around me to be less than me by comparison. Especially you. Because if you were extraordinary, which you are, then what did that make me? Just average. And I couldn't handle that. So you made me less," Evelyn said quietly. "So I could feel like more," Daniel confirmed. "And it's the most shameful thing I've ever done. Not the gala, though that was awful. But the daily, systematic minimizing of who you are over years. That's what I can't forgive myself for." Dr. Torres interjected gently. "Daniel, self-flagellation doesn't help anyone. What matters now is what you're doing to change." "I'm in therapy," Daniel said. "I'm working on understanding why I need external validation so desperately. I'm learning to find worth in who I am, not what I achieve. I'm practicing asking questions and actually listening. I'm trying to become someone who can celebrate other people's success without feeling diminished by it." "And is it working?" Dr. Torres asked. Daniel thought about it honestly. "Sometimes. I still catch myself wanting to make everything about me. I still feel that instinct to compete, to prove myself. But I'm getting better at noticing it and choosing differently. I don't know if I'll ever be completely free of it, but I'm trying." Dr. Torres turned back to Evelyn. "What would you need to feel safe in this marriage?" Evelyn had been thinking about this question for months. "I need consistency. Not grand gestures, but daily proof that I matter to you. I need you to ask about my work and actually engage with the answer. I need equal partnership in managing our life, not me carrying all the invisible labor while you handle the important stuff. I need you to introduce me with pride, to talk about me as a whole person with my own accomplishments, not just as your wife. I need to feel like you're interested in who I am, not just in what I can do for you." She paused. "But more than all of that, I need to believe that I can be my full self without you feeling threatened. That I can land a big contract and celebrate it without worrying that it will make you feel small. That I can be successful and respected and visible without it damaging your ego. Can you handle that? Can you genuinely be happy for me when I succeed in ways that might overshadow you?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, and Evelyn appreciated that he was really considering the question instead of just saying what she wanted to hear. "I want to say yes," he finally said. "I want to believe I'm capable of that. But honestly, I don't know. I've never been tested on it. These past 6 months, you've been gone. I've had space to work on myself without facing the daily reality of being married to someone more successful than me. I don't know if I can handle it when it's real, when we're living together and you're getting recognition and I'm just existing next to your brilliance." It was perhaps the most honest thing he'd ever said to her, and Evelyn felt something shift. Not toward forgiveness necessarily, but toward respect. He was finally being real instead of performing. "Then maybe that's what we need to find out," Dr. Torres suggested. "Not whether your marriage can go back to what it was, because it can't and shouldn't. But whether you can build something new, with both of you showing up as your full selves and seeing if you can coexist in that truth." They agreed to a trial period. Evelyn would move back into the house, but they would sleep in separate rooms. They would live together as roommates essentially, rebuilding trust and testing whether they could share space without falling into old patterns. Dr. Torres would see them weekly, both together and individually, monitoring their progress. It was awkward at first. Years of marriage meant they had routines, muscle memory ways of interacting that didn't fit their new dynamic. Daniel would start to walk past Evelyn's office, then pause, remember he was supposed to be different, and awkwardly ask what she was working on. Evelyn would start to hide her schedule to make things easier, then catch herself and deliberately share her upcoming meetings, watching Daniel's face for signs of resentment. They were both hyper-aware, performing their new roles, and it felt exhausting. But slowly, very slowly, something started to shift. Daniel began genuinely listening when Evelyn talked about her projects. He asked follow-up questions that showed he was actually engaged, not just performing interest. When she landed a major new contract with a national retail chain, worth nearly $700,000, he took her to dinner to celebrate. She waited for the inevitable moment when he would make it about himself, would find a way to redirect attention to his own work. It didn't come. He asked her questions about the project, about her strategy, about what excited her about it. And when she could tell he was feeling insecure, feeling that old competitive instinct rise up, he acknowledged it instead of acting on it. "I'm happy for you," he said at one point during dinner. "I want you to know that. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't also feel a little threatened. You're operating at a level I'll probably never reach, and that brings up all my old insecurities about not being enough. But that's my work to do, not your problem to manage." Evelyn felt something in her chest loosen. This was what she'd needed all along, not perfection but honesty. Not a husband who never felt insecure, but one who could acknowledge it without making it her responsibility to fix. For her part, Evelyn was working on her own patterns. She had to stop automatically making herself smaller. When Daniel's colleagues invited them to dinner, she had to resist the urge to fade into the background. She talked about her work when asked. She didn't downplay her success. She let herself take up space, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. One night, about 2 months into their trial period, they were both working in the living room. Daniel looked up from his laptop and just watched Evelyn for a moment. She was completely absorbed in whatever she was reading, her brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally making notes. "What?" Evelyn asked, noticing his stare. "I was just thinking that I never used to really look at you," Daniel said. "I mean, I saw you, but I didn't look. I didn't notice how you work, how focused you get, how your whole body language changes when you're solving a problem. You're fascinating, and I missed it for 15 years. Evelyn didn't know what to say to that. It was a beautiful observation and a tragic confession at the same time. "I'm looking now," Daniel continued. "I'm trying to really see you. And I'm realizing how much I missed." 3 months into their trial, they had a major setback. Daniel's company promoted him to a director-level position, not the regional role he'd been chasing, but a solid promotion nonetheless. They went out to celebrate, and at the restaurant, Daniel ran into some former colleagues. He introduced Evelyn as, "My wife, Evelyn. She's a strategic consultant." It was better than cleaning staff, certainly, but Evelyn caught the hesitation, the vagueness. Later, in the car, she called him on it. "You were embarrassed to give details about my work." Daniel started to deny it, then stopped himself. "You're right. They were asking about me, congratulating me, and I didn't want to redirect attention away from my achievement. Which is exactly the old pattern. I'm sorry." "Are you?" Evelyn asked, and there was an edge to her voice. "Are you really? Or are you just sorry I noticed?" "Both," Daniel admitted. "I'm sorry I did it, and I'm sorry you caught it, because now you're disappointed in me and that feels terrible. But the first sorry is real. I know I need to do better." They sat in the car in their driveway, neither moving to go inside. "I don't know if I can do this," Evelyn said quietly. I don't know if I can spend the rest of my life monitoring whether you're going to minimize me, whether you're going to handle my success with grace or resentment. It's exhausting, Daniel. I'm exhausted. Daniel felt panic rise. This was it, the moment he'd been dreading. She was going to leave, and he would have no one to blame but himself. What if, he started, then stopped, trying to find the right words. What if we gave it more time? Not forever, but another 3 months. And I promise to do better. Not perfect, because I'm clearly going to mess up sometimes, but better. More honest. More immediate in catching myself and correcting. Evelyn looked at him, this man she'd loved for so long, this man who'd hurt her so deeply, this man who was genuinely trying to change but still carrying all his old wounds and insecurities. 3 more months, she agreed. But Daniel, if we can't figure this out, if we can't build something healthier, we need to be honest about it. We need to let each other go. Because staying in a broken marriage out of fear or habit or sunk cost fallacy, that's not love. That's just cowardice. The breakthrough came, unexpectedly, at a company event. Not Daniel's company this time, but a conference where Evelyn had been invited to speak on a panel about business restructuring in uncertain economic times. Daniel had offered to come for support, and Evelyn had hesitantly agreed, nervous about how he'd handle seeing her in her professional element. The conference was at a hotel downtown, hundreds of attendees, mostly executives and consultants. Evelyn was on a panel with 3 other experts, discussing case studies and strategies. Daniel sat in the audience, watching his wife command the room with quiet authority. She was articulate, insightful, occasionally funny in her dry way. She fielded complex questions with ease, referencing projects and frameworks that Daniel was only beginning to understand. At one point, the moderator asked about her most challenging project. Evelyn thought for a moment, then told the story of Hartwell Industries without naming the company. She talked about the difficulty of convincing entrenched leadership to make radical changes, about the emotional weight of knowing hundreds of jobs depended on getting the strategy right, about the satisfaction of seeing a company not just survive but thrive. The hardest part wasn't the analysis or the strategy, Evelyn said. It was the human element. You're asking people to trust you with their livelihoods, to bet everything on your recommendation. That responsibility, it keeps you up at night. You double-check everything. You wargame every scenario. And even when you're confident in the data, you're terrified you've missed something. Because numbers on a spreadsheet represent real people, real families. I've never forgotten that. The audience responded with strong applause. During the break, person after person approached Evelyn, wanting to network, to ask questions, to pitch their own projects for her consideration. Daniel watched from a distance, and here was the test. How did he feel seeing his wife be the star, the expert, the person everyone wanted to talk to? The old Daniel would have felt diminished, would have found a way to insert himself, to remind everyone that he was somebody too. But this Daniel, the one who'd spent months in therapy and self-reflection, felt something different. He felt proud. Not performative pride, not the kind that's really about his association with her success, but genuine appreciation for who she was and what she'd built. He felt lucky to know her, to have access to this brilliant mind and generous heart. And yes, he felt a little insecure, a little small by comparison. But he recognized that feeling for what it was, his own issue to manage, not her problem to fix by being less. After the panel, after the networking, they went to dinner. Evelyn was energized in a way Daniel hadn't seen in years. She talked about the connections she'd made, the potential projects, her thoughts on the other panelists' perspectives. And Daniel listened, asked questions, engaged fully. At one point, Evelyn stopped mid-sentence. "What?" Daniel asked. "You're different," she said. "Tonight, watching you watch me at the conference, you were actually proud. Not pretending, not performing, but genuinely proud. I could see it on your face." Daniel nodded. "I was. I am. Evelyn, watching you up there, I finally understood what I had and what I almost lost. You're extraordinary. Not just smart, though you are. Not just successful, though you are. But your whole approach to work, to life, it's remarkable. You care about people. You do exceptional work without needing anyone to witness it. You have this integrity that's so rare. And I'm genuinely in awe of you. Tears welled up in Evelyn's eyes. That's all I ever wanted. Not worship, not to be put on a pedestal. Just to be seen. To have you look at me and appreciate who I actually am. I see you now, Daniel said. And I know I missed 15 years of really seeing you. I can't get that time back. But if you'll let me, I want to spend whatever time we have left actually knowing you, being curious about your thoughts and your work and your whole inner life that I ignored for so long. They sat in the restaurant, and something that had been broken between them started, tentatively, to heal. Not completely, not instantly, but the process began. That night, they talked for hours. Really talked, like they hadn't in years. Evelyn told him about projects from years ago, about the satisfactions and frustrations of her work. Daniel told her about his own insecurities, about his fear of being ordinary, about how he was learning to find worth in things beyond professional achievement. They didn't solve everything. There were still wounds that needed healing, patterns that needed breaking, trust that needed rebuilding. But for the first time in their marriage, they were both showing up as their full selves, and the space between them felt less like a battlefield and more like a bridge. 6 months after Evelyn returned from Boston, they made the decision to really try. Not just trial period roommates, but actually working to rebuild their marriage into something healthier than it had ever been. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when Daniel's old patterns resurfaced, when he felt threatened by Evelyn's success or forgot to ask about her day. But the difference now was that he caught himself faster, and when Evelyn pointed it out, he didn't get defensive. He acknowledged it, apologized genuinely, and tried to do better. Evelyn had her own work to do. She had to resist the urge to make herself small, to hide her success, to manage Daniel's emotions. She had to practice taking up space, being visible, claiming her achievements. It felt uncomfortable, even after months of effort. But slowly, it started to feel normal, even right. They created new routines. Every morning over coffee, they each shared what they were working on that day. Not performatively, but genuinely sharing their schedules, their priorities, their concerns. Daniel started asking follow-up questions about Evelyn's projects, questions that showed he'd been listening to previous conversations and remembering details. Evelyn started sharing more, trusting that her success wouldn't threaten him, or if it did, that he would manage those feelings himself instead of making them her problem. They established a rule, no diminishing each other, ever, publicly or privately. If Daniel introduced Evelyn, he gave her full professional description. This is my wife, Evelyn. She's a strategic consultant who specializes in corporate restructuring. She's brilliant at solving complex organizational problems. If Evelyn talked about Daniel's work, she spoke with respect about his actual contributions, not inflated praise, but genuine recognition. They went to couples therapy weekly, even when things were going well. Dr. Torres helped them navigate the difficult moments, the setbacks, the times when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. She taught them communication tools, ways to express needs without accusations, ways to take responsibility without self-flagellation. One session, about 8 months after they'd started rebuilding, Dr. Torres asked them a question. If you could go back to the beginning of your relationship, knowing everything you know now, would you still marry each other? Daniel and Evelyn looked at each other, and then, almost simultaneously, they both said, no. Dr. Torres raised her eyebrows. Interesting. Tell me more. If I knew then what I know now about my own insecurities, about how I was going to treat her, I wouldn't have put her through that, Daniel said. She deserved better than what I gave her for most of our marriage. And I wouldn't have married someone if I knew I was going to spend 15 years making myself invisible, Evelyn added. I would have had the self-awareness to recognize the pattern and either address it immediately or walk away. But, Evelyn continued, I'm glad we married each other anyway. Because as painful as it's been, it's also taught me things I needed to learn. About boundaries. About self-worth. About not confusing love with self-erasure. And it's teaching me things I desperately needed to learn, Daniel said. About humility. About deriving worth from who I am rather than what I achieve. About celebrating others without feeling diminished. I hate that I hurt you to learn these lessons, but I'm grateful I'm learning them. Dr. Torres nodded. That's mature. You're not romanticizing your past or pretending the pain didn't happen. You're acknowledging what was broken while appreciating what you're building now. That's healthy. They continued therapy, continued the hard work of becoming people who could have a healthy partnership. And slowly, their separate bedrooms started to feel less necessary. 9 months after Evelyn had returned from Boston, they had a conversation about moving back into the same room. I want to, Evelyn said. But I'm nervous. Sleeping separately has been this physical reminder that we're rebuilding, that we're not taking anything for granted. If we go back to sharing a bed, will we slip back into old patterns? We might, Daniel said honestly. We probably will sometimes. But we'll catch it faster now. We have tools we didn't have before. We have honesty we didn't have before. We have a commitment to actually seeing each other that we didn't have before. They moved back into the same bedroom, tentatively at first, but it felt right. The physical closeness brought back some of the intimacy they'd lost, not just sexual intimacy, though that too, but the emotional intimacy of falling asleep next to someone who really knows you, who sees your flaws and chooses you anyway. If you're feeling this story, if Evelyn and Daniel's journey is resonating with you, I need to know. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever been in a relationship where you felt invisible? Or have you been the person who made someone else feel that way? What would you do if you were Evelyn? Would you have stayed and fought for the marriage, or would you have walked away after the gala? And if you've stuck with this story from the beginning, comment, still here, so I know you're invested in seeing how this ends. Because we're not done yet. A year after the gala, Hartwell Industries held another annual event. Daniel and Evelyn received an invitation, and they both stared at it with a mixture of anticipation and dread. We don't have to go, Daniel said. If it's too painful, if it brings up too many memories, we can skip it. Evelyn thought about it. A year ago, she would have said yes immediately, would have been grateful for the excuse to avoid potential discomfort. But she was different now. No, she said. I think we should go. It'll be a good test. A year later, have we actually changed, or are we just performing change in the safety of our home? So they went. Evelyn wore a red dress this time, not navy. Something bold, something that refused to be invisible. Daniel wore his suit, and when she came downstairs, he stopped and just looked at her. You're stunning, he said. You know that? I'm starting to believe it, Evelyn said with a small smile. The gala was different this year. People recognized Evelyn immediately. She wasn't the invisible woman who'd been dismissed last year. She was the consultant who'd saved the company, the woman the CEO had honored. People approached her throughout the night, wanting to talk, to network, to thank her for her work. And Daniel, he stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. When people asked how he was connected to her, he said with genuine pride, I'm her husband. Lucky man. When colleagues from his department wanted to talk business, he included Evelyn in the conversation, asked her opinion, deferred to her expertise when relevant. When she was deep in conversation with a potential client, he got them drinks and waited patiently, not interrupting, not trying to insert himself. At one point, Jonathan Hartwell approached them. Evelyn, Daniel, I'm glad you both came. He turned to Evelyn. I wanted to tell you personally, the restructuring strategy you developed for us 20 years ago, we're using an updated version of it for the expansion. It's still brilliant. Still the foundation of everything we do. Thank you, Evelyn said. That means a lot. Jonathan turned to Daniel. And Daniel, I've noticed the changes in you this past year. The humility, the teamwork, the way you've been mentoring younger staff without needing credit. That's the leadership we need. The regional position, if you're still interested, I'd like to discuss it with you next week. Daniel felt the old surge of excitement, but he tempered it immediately. I appreciate that, Jonathan. Can I think about it and get back to you? I need to discuss it with Evelyn. It would mean more travel, more demands on my time, and that's a decision we need to make together. Jonathan looked surprised but pleased. Of course. Take your time. After he walked away, Evelyn turned to Daniel. You did it. Did what? Daniel asked. You got offered the job you wanted, and your first thought wasn't about yourself. It was about us. About how it would affect our life together. That's huge, Daniel. Daniel smiled, but it was a complicated smile. Honestly, I don't know if I even want it anymore. A year ago, that position was everything to me. It represented success, status, validation. But now, I don't know. The travel would mean less time with you. The pressure would mean I'd be stressed, distracted. And I've learned this year that the life we're building, the actual relationship we have, that matters more to me than any title. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. This was real change. Not performed, not temporary, but fundamental. We should still discuss it, she said. Don't make a decision based on what you think I want. Make it based on what you actually want. That's the thing, Daniel said. I don't know what I want anymore. Or rather, I'm learning that what I want has changed. I want a life that feels meaningful, not just impressive. I want to come home at the end of the day and actually be present. I want to know my wife, really know her, and keep knowing her as she grows and changes. That regional position, a year ago I would have killed for it. Now I'm not sure it serves the life I'm trying to build. They stayed at the gala for another hour, but it felt different from last year. They weren't performing their marriage for an audience. They were actually together, a team, partners facing the world side by side instead of in competition. As they left, walking to their car in the parking garage, Evelyn stopped. What? Daniel asked. I'm just thinking about last year. How different this is. How different we are. Do you wish we could go back? Daniel asked. Back to before the gala, before everything fell apart. Evelyn thought about it honestly. No. As painful as it was, as much as I wish it hadn't taken a public humiliation to wake us both up, I don't want to go back to who we were. That marriage was built on my invisibility and your ego. This one, whatever we're building now, it's built on honesty and mutual respect. That's worth more than the comfort of ignorance. They drove home in companionable silence, and for the first time in 15 years, they both felt like they were driving towards something instead of away from it. Over the next week, Daniel and Evelyn had multiple conversations about the regional position. They laid out the logistics. The position would require Daniel to travel 3 weeks out of every month, overseeing operations across 5 states. The salary was significantly higher, nearly double his current income, with stock options and bonuses. The prestige was considerable, essentially making him the second most powerful person in the company's operational structure. A year ago, it would have been an easy yes. But now, they had to weigh it against what they were building. What do you want me to do? Daniel asked one evening. They were sitting in the living room, Evelyn with her laptop, Daniel with the position details printed out. I can't tell you what to do, Evelyn said. This has to be your choice. But it affects you, Daniel pointed out. It affects us. If I take this, I'll barely be home. You'll essentially be living alone most of the time. Evelyn set down her laptop. Let me ask you something. If you take this position, will you resent me? Daniel looked confused. Why would I resent you? Because turning it down would be, in part, about prioritizing our marriage. And if you turn down this massive opportunity for us, and then things get hard, as they inevitably will, are you going to throw that back at me? Are you going to say, I gave up the regional position for you as a weapon? Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I don't think so. But honestly, I can't guarantee it. When I'm angry, when I'm scared, I don't always behave well. We both know that. At least you're honest, Evelyn said. So here's what I think. You need to make this decision for yourself, based on what you actually want, not based on what you think I want or what you think the marriage needs. Because if you make it for me and things get hard, you will resent me. But if you make it for yourself, whatever you decide, that's something you own. Daniel nodded slowly. Okay. Then I need to figure out what I actually want. He spent the next few days really sitting with the question. He talked to Dr. Reeves about it in therapy. He journaled about it. He imagined both scenarios in detail. Taking the position meant status, money, power. It meant being important, being the person everyone came to for decisions. It meant proving to everyone, including himself, that he'd made it, that he was successful by any measurable standard. But it also meant hotel rooms and airport lounges and conference calls. It meant missing dinners with Evelyn. It meant being so tired on the weekends that he'd have no energy for the relationship work they were still doing. It meant the constant pressure of managing 5 states' worth of operations, the politics, the stress, the performance of leadership even when he was exhausted. Turning it down meant staying in his current director role. It was a good position, respectable, well-paying. It meant being home most nights. It meant having energy for his marriage, for his own life, for interests beyond work. It meant accepting that he wouldn't reach the absolute pinnacle of the corporate ladder, and being okay with that. 3 days before he needed to give Jonathan his answer, Daniel woke up in the middle of the night with clarity. He knew what he wanted. The next morning, he told Evelyn. I'm going to turn it down. Evelyn looked at him carefully. Are you sure? Because once you turn it down, there probably won't be another offer like this. I know, Daniel said. And I'm sure. Not because I have to for the marriage, though that's part of it. But because I genuinely don't want that life anymore. I've spent my entire adult life chasing the next promotion, the next title, the next level of success. And it's never been enough. There's always been something higher to reach for, someone more successful to envy. I'm tired, Evelyn. I'm tired of performing. I want a life that feels good, not just looks good. Evelyn felt a surge of relief she hadn't expected. She'd been preparing herself to support him either way, but hearing him choose their life together, choose presence over prestige, it meant something. What will you tell Jonathan? She asked. The truth, Daniel said. That I'm honored by the offer, but I've learned this past year that I value quality of life over career advancement. That I want to be excellent at what I do without sacrificing everything else for it. And that I'm happy where I am. He called Jonathan that afternoon and declined the position. Jonathan was surprised but gracious. I respect that, Daniel. It takes a strong person to know what they actually want and choose it even when the world is offering something flashier. The director position is yours for as long as you want it, and if you ever change your mind about advancing, we'll talk. When Daniel hung up, he felt something unexpected. Not regret, not second-guessing, but relief. He'd spent decades climbing, and he'd just chosen to stop climbing and enjoy where he was. It felt revolutionary. 2 months after Daniel turned down the regional position, Evelyn got an offer of her own. A major consulting firm had been tracking her work for years and wanted to bring her on as a partner. It would mean structure, a team, resources, and a platform to do larger-scale work. It would also mean less autonomy, more politics, more visibility. The financial offer was extraordinary, a base salary in the high 6 figures plus significant equity and bonuses. It was the kind of opportunity that doesn't come twice. Evelyn's first instinct was to turn it down immediately. She valued her independence, her ability to work on her own terms. But then she caught herself. Was she turning it down because she genuinely didn't want it, or because accepting would mean being even more successful, even more visible, and some part of her was still afraid of threatening Daniel with her success? She brought it up at dinner. I got offered a partner position at Kensington Strategic. They want me to lead their restructuring division. Daniel's eyes widened. Kensington. That's huge, Evelyn. They're one of the top firms in the country. I know, Evelyn said. The offer is good. Really good. What are you going to do? Daniel asked. I don't know, Evelyn admitted. Part of me wants to say no immediately. I like working independently. I like choosing my clients, setting my own schedule, working from home. But another part of me wonders if I'm turning it down out of fear. Fear of being too visible, too successful. Fear of threatening you, even though you've been working so hard to handle my success better. Daniel set down his fork. Okay, here's what I want to say, and I want you to really hear it. You should take the position if you want it, not if you think you should want it, but if you genuinely do. And I can't promise I won't feel insecure about it. You'll be making significantly more than me. You'll be leading a division at one of the most prestigious firms in the country. You'll probably get written up in business publications, invited to speak at major conferences. And yeah, some part of me, the old part that measured my worth by comparison to everyone around me, that part will struggle with it. He reached across the table and took her hand. But I'm going to manage that. That's my work to do, not your burden to carry. You've spent too much of our marriage making yourself small to protect my ego. Don't do that anymore. If you want this position, take it. If you don't. But make the choice for you, not for me. Evelyn felt tears welling up. This was what partnership looked like. Not the absence of difficult emotions, but the willingness to manage them yourself instead of making them someone else's responsibility. I need to think about it, she said. Take your time, Daniel said. And whatever you decide, I'm proud of you for even being offered it. Kensington doesn't offer partnerships lightly. They clearly see what I see, that you're exceptional at what you do. Over the next week, Evelyn thought carefully about the offer. She talked to Dr. Kim about it. She made lists of pros and cons. She imagined herself in the role, leading a team, having resources to tackle larger projects. She also imagined the office politics, the travel, the pressure to bill hours and generate revenue. In the end, she turned it down. Not because she was afraid of threatening Daniel, and not because she was afraid of success. But because, genuinely, she valued her independence more than the prestige and resources the firm could offer. She liked working from home. She liked choosing clients based on the work rather than revenue potential. She liked the quiet satisfaction of her current life, and she didn't want to trade it for something more impressive but less personally fulfilling. When she told Daniel her decision, he looked at her seriously. Are you sure? Because I meant what I said, I can handle it if you take it. I know you can, Evelyn said. And that's why I can make this choice freely. I'm not turning it down to protect you. I'm turning it down because I genuinely don't want it. But knowing that you could handle it if I did want it, that makes all the difference. Daniel pulled her into a hug, and they stood in their kitchen, holding each other, two people who'd almost destroyed their marriage and somehow found their way back to something better than they'd started with. 2 years after the gala that had exposed everything, Daniel and Evelyn were different people in a different marriage. They still had hard days. They still fell into old patterns occasionally. Daniel still sometimes felt threatened by Evelyn's success, and Evelyn still sometimes caught herself making herself smaller. But they caught these moments faster now. They talked about them honestly. They course-corrected together. Daniel had become genuinely good at his job without needing it to define his worth. He mentored younger employees, shared credit generously, and found satisfaction in the work itself rather than the recognition it brought. He'd become the kind of leader people actually wanted to work for, not because he was important but because he was present, helpful, genuinely invested in their growth. Evelyn's consulting practice continued to thrive. She'd taken on a few larger clients and had even hired an assistant to help manage scheduling and administrative work. She was making more money than ever, and she and Daniel had an agreement. They kept their finances mostly separate, contributed equally to household expenses, and neither kept score about who earned what. It removed the financial power dynamics that had subtly poisoned their earlier marriage. They'd established rituals that kept them connected. Friday nights were date night, no exceptions unless one of them was traveling. They took turns planning it, sometimes fancy restaurants, sometimes just walks in the park followed by takeout at home. Sunday mornings were coffee and conversation time, where they each shared what was happening in their work, their thoughts, their inner lives. They'd learn to be curious about each other again, to ask questions and actually want to know the answers. They still saw Dr. Torres monthly, even though things were good. They'd learned that therapy wasn't just for crisis, it was maintenance for a relationship they'd both learned was worth maintaining. One afternoon, Daniel came home from work and found Evelyn in the living room, staring at her laptop with an expression he couldn't read. "What's wrong?" he asked. Evelyn looked up. "I just got an email from the National Association of Business Consultants. They want to give me their Distinguished Achievement Award. It's a big deal. Like, really big. There's a ceremony, a lot of press coverage, it gets written up in major business publications." Daniel sat down next to her. "That's incredible, Evelyn. You deserve it." "I don't want to do it," Evelyn said. "The public recognition, the ceremony, all the attention. It makes me uncomfortable." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Can I be honest about something?" "Always," Evelyn said. "I think you should do it. Not for the recognition, I know that doesn't matter to you. But because there are probably young women out there, women who are brilliant at what they do but who've learned to make themselves small, who need to see that you can be successful without being loud. That you can be powerful without being performative. You could show them that." Evelyn looked at him, surprised. "A year ago, would you have said that? Would you have encouraged me to accept an award that would put me in the spotlight?" Daniel laughed, but it was a genuine laugh, not bitter. "Absolutely not. A year ago, I would have found some way to discourage you while making it sound like I was being supportive. I would have said something like, you don't need their validation, or, that kind of attention might complicate your client relationships. But really, I would have been terrified of you being recognized as exceptional while I was just, regular." "And now?" Evelyn asked. "Now I'm terrified you'll say no because you've spent so long making yourself invisible that you don't know how to be seen," Daniel said. "Evelyn, you're one of the best at what you do. You've saved companies, preserved jobs, helped organizations thrive. You deserve recognition for that. Not because recognition makes it more valuable, your work has value whether anyone acknowledges it or not, but because sometimes being visible matters. Sometimes other people need to see that it's possible." Evelyn felt something unlock in her chest. "Okay. I'll do it." The award ceremony was 3 months later, at a hotel ballroom with several hundred attendees. Evelyn wore a deep green dress that made her feel powerful and visible. Daniel was beside her, and when she walked to the stage to accept the award, he was the first person on his feet applauding, and the look on his face was pure, uncomplicated pride. Evelyn gave a short acceptance speech. She thanked the organization, acknowledged some mentors and colleagues who'd shaped her approach. And then she said something that wasn't in her prepared remarks. "I want to talk for a moment about invisibility. For most of my career, I've worked behind the scenes. I've done work I'm proud of, but I've done it quietly, without seeking recognition. Part of that was genuine preference, I value the work more than the applause. But I'd be lying if I said part of it wasn't fear. Fear of being too much. Fear of threatening people, particularly men in my life, with my success. Fear of being labeled difficult or ambitious in ways that women get labeled but men get celebrated for. She paused, finding Daniel in the audience. He was listening intently, and there were tears in his eyes. I stayed invisible for a long time because it felt safer. But safe isn't the same as free. And I'm learning, late but learning nonetheless, that being seen, really seen for who you are and what you do, that's not arrogance. That's just truth. So to anyone here who's been making themselves smaller to make others more comfortable, I see you. And I want you to know that your success doesn't diminish anyone else. Your brilliance doesn't make someone else less bright. You don't have to apologize for being extraordinary. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, dozens of people, mostly women but some men too, approached her to thank her for those words, to tell her they needed to hear them. Daniel stood back, letting her have this moment, and she could see on his face that he understood the significance of what she'd said, and that he was genuinely happy for her. On their 17th wedding anniversary, 2.5 years after the gala that had almost ended their marriage, Daniel and Evelyn went back to the restaurant where they'd had their first date. It was a small Italian place in the neighborhood where they'd both lived when they first met, still family-owned, still serving the same pasta dishes they'd shared 17 years earlier. They sat at a corner table, candles flickering between them, and looked at each other across the table with an honesty that would have terrified their younger selves. "Do you think we made it?" Evelyn asked. "Made it where?" Daniel responded. "Through. Past the worst of it. To something that feels sustainable." Daniel thought about it. "I think we're making it, present tense. Not made it, past tense, like it's done and fixed forever. We're in the ongoing process of making it work. And some days are easier than others." "That's fair," Evelyn said. "Do you ever regret it? Staying, trying to rebuild, all the work it's taken?" Evelyn was quiet, really considering the question. "No. But I'm also grateful I had the option to leave. Knowing I could walk away, that I had my own income and my own identity separate from being your wife, that's what made it possible to stay and fight for us. If I'd felt trapped, if I'd had no other options, I don't think we could have built anything healthy." "I'm grateful you stayed," Daniel said. "But I'm also grateful you almost left. Because that's what woke me up. I could have lost you, and I would have deserved to. That terror, that possibility, it forced me to face who I'd become." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I don't ever want to take you for granted again. I don't want to wake up in 20 years and realize I've slipped back into old patterns. So I need you to promise me something." "What?" Evelyn asked. "Promise me that if I start making you feel invisible again, if I start treating your success as threatening instead of celebrating it, if I start performing leadership instead of actually being present, promise me you'll call me on it immediately. Don't let it build up for years. Don't protect my feelings at the expense of your truth." "I promise," Evelyn said. "But you have to promise me something too. Promise me that if I start hiding again, if I start making myself smaller, if I start managing your emotions instead of expressing my own needs, promise me you'll notice and you'll say something." "I promise," Daniel said. They sat there, holding hands across the table, two people who'd hurt each other badly and somehow found their way back to love, not the easy love of their early years, but the harder, deeper love that comes from choosing each other with full knowledge of each other's flaws. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said. "Of course." "That night at the gala, when Jonathan bowed to you and everyone followed, I remember standing there feeling like my whole world was collapsing. Like everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my own importance, was a lie. And it was terrifying. But you know what I think now?" "What?" Evelyn asked. "I think that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because I'm glad I hurt you, I'll regret that forever. But because it shattered this false version of myself that I'd been performing for decades. It forced me to ask who I actually was underneath all the posturing. And the answer was uncomfortable. I was insecure, performative, so dependent on external validation that I'd lost any sense of internal worth. But at least now I know. At least now I can work on it. Evelyn squeezed his hand. I'm glad too. Not glad for the pain, but glad we got to this place. I spent 15 years of our marriage being half a person. I showed you the parts one thought you could handle and hid the rest. That's not sustainable. That's not real. And now, for the first time, I feel like I can be fully myself in this marriage. That's worth the pain it took to get here. They finished dinner and walked home through the city streets, hand in hand, two people who'd almost lost each other and found something better in the wreckage. Their marriage wasn't perfect. It would never be perfect. But it was real, and honest, and built on a foundation of mutual respect that they both understood was precious and fragile and worth protecting. So let me ask you one more time, because this story isn't just about Daniel and Evelyn. It's about all of us, about how we see the people in our lives, about whether we make space for their full selves or only accept the parts that don't threaten us. Have you ever made someone feel small to make yourself feel big? Have you ever hidden parts of yourself to make someone else more comfortable? Are there people in your life right now, people who are supporting you, loving you, carrying weight you don't even notice, who deserve to be really seen? Drop a comment and tell me. Tell me where you're watching from, what this story made you feel, whether you've been Daniel or Evelyn or both at different times. Tell me if you think they made the right choice to stay together, or if you would have walked away. Tell me about the people in your life who work quietly but powerfully, who deserve more recognition than they get. Because stories like this matter. They hold up a mirror and ask us to look honestly at how we're showing up in our relationships, in our marriages, in our partnerships, in our friendships. And if this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people beside you, hit that subscribe button. Because this channel is built on stories that challenge us, that make us uncomfortable in necessary ways, that ask us to be better than we were yesterday. We tell stories about humility and pride, about seeing and being seen, about the hard work of building relationships that honor everyone's full humanity. The next story might be about you, or someone you love, or someone you need to become. Don't miss it. Thank you for staying with me through this entire journey. Thank you for being willing to sit with discomfort, to think deeply, to feel fully. That's how we grow. That's how we become people worth knowing. I'll see you in the next one.